welcome everybody, and thank you so much for joining our bi-weekly webinars or dialogues, our webinars to share, to learn about impact leadership and get inspired to real action. That's what Be Women is all about. I'm Laura Giadorou Koch, founder of Be Women, lawyer in Argentina and in the state of New York, and super passionate about the B Corp movement of using business as a force for good. So before we get started, who are we, Be Women? We are a global network of women entrepreneurs that seek to balance purpose and profits in the markets towards a care economy. Yes, a care economy, where people and environment are a key focus, where our values, respect, dignity, collaboration are a driving force to action. So in the next 50 minutes, you'll be super inspired. The topic of this call today is impact investment. Is it delivering on its promise? And what is the role of women in driving the growth and impact on this approach? And with this, I would like to introduce to our amazing speakers today, Fleur Heyns, CEO of Proof of Concept, and then Balandina Jaquier. So Fleur has had an amazing career for the last few years, and she has started at JP Morgan, and then from JP Morgan, South Africa, creating the most amazing initiative or the company called Global Trader, that then after 7 years, it sold globally. And so since then, since she sold, she became a most amazing angel investor and impact investor, and really connected with what matters of what we're going to talk today. She's a member of YPO, where we met many years ago, and a member of Tonic and 100%ers, all about impact. That it was started by Lisa and Charlie Kleisner. And Julia is also a member of this amazing organization called Tonic and 100%ers. And Julia is a founder of KATALYST and author of her book, Catalyzing Wealth for Change and Guide to Impact Investment. So she's an internationally recognized independent consultant on impact investment and very trusted for more than 20 years. And she is recognized in many ways and is a board member and advisory to boards like CFEM, Unilever, and 4 Partners. On this note, before we get started, I want to share with you the Be Women Empowering Move, so that when you listen to this conference, you get the feeling of empowerment and get real inspired to action. That is, move your shoulders back, chin up, make your eyes twinkle with joy and determination, and with a wide smile, let's get started. So my question to you, Fleur, is you have been an impact investor since 2008, as an investor, as an entrepreneur, as an advisor. So are your observations in terms of capital mobilization and impact, can you tell us about the impact achievement that has happened in all these years?
Sure, yeah, so thank you firstly very much for having me, as I said, on your show, Laura. And, thank you to everybody who's dialing in, because I'm sure you're all running pretty busy schedules. So I hope it's a worthwhile hour for you. So my experience, as Laura explained, I come from a hardcore financial background. Global Trader was a derivatives trading platform for emerging market retail investors. And we use technology as a breakthrough to basically give retail investors access to global markets. So really creating economic and operational efficiencies through technology. Through a roundabout way, I ended up at a meeting at the Skoll conference in Oxford in 2008. And what just really struck me is that, I'm a passionate person, but I'm predominantly driven by logic. So I just saw this incredible rational approach by predominantly business people at this conference to tackle the world's problems. And, that very much drew me. So then fast forward from 2007 to 2017, really, Laura, as you mentioned, it's not just me. So my husband, I also dragged out of his investment bank. So he was building an investment bank in Russia called Troika Dialogue, and they also sold, and I put him onto the impact wagon. And together we've made several investments. So our first investment was a company called Osmosis Investment Management, which is now over $2 billion publicly listed fund that looks at resource efficiency in large cap stocks. And then, as you mentioned, I've worked a lot in the intermediation space, and I've done a lot of sort of angel investments, which were more private equity, venture capital. So over those 10 years, I have to say, like, the talk has gone like amazingly high, like the hype, the buzz, the impact word has emerged. But when you still look at actually how much capital is deployed, and I'm just using the GIN numbers because I don't have any better numbers, and we're looking at an asset base of 500 billion, which is less than 0.4% of, well, maybe a little bit more now since the market collapsed this week, but it's still a very, very small portion of the total asset base in the world. And we've got to ask ourselves the question, is this a demand-based problem, or is it because maybe we don't have the right solutions and products to meet the demand? And, you know, we can explore that further during our call. Sorry, Laura, you're on mute.
So can you explain what is the GIN, so that in case somebody doesn't know?
Oh, yeah, so the GIN was actually, I think it was established 2010 maybe. It's the Global Impact Investment Network, and it's GIIN, and TONIC, which was basically set up at the same time, is TONIC, but it's not an acronym for any words, right? So it was GIN and TONIC that were the two leading alliances. So TONIC very much focusing on retail and individual investors and getting them to commit to impact investing, and the GIN network is now pretty much the go-to alliance association for institutional investors.
Thank you, Fleur. And I have another question for you before we get started with Julia. And so if technology could be a lever, of how specific do you want to see this being utilized, and how would this help promote greater opportunities for women in this space in a broader sense?
Yeah. So if we would agree, and I'm not saying everybody does, that there is no issue with demand. I mean, if I look at, you know, I mean, we have an investor, and it's actually called Proof of Impact is our latest company. We have an investor called Franklin Templeton in our business who managed $1.5 trillion. And the fact that they even took a stake in our business is because they really, really see an increasing demand from their retail investor base, to give them something a little bit more than just a financial return. So I don't think the actual demand side is the problem. I think there is an inability for us to structure suitable, appropriate financial instruments to feed this larger machine or this larger demand that is coming up. So I think technology can be applied at 3 levels. First of all, I think our conventional top-down driven system with which we fund, we've done this for centuries, which is, you know, you have an asset owner, they gave money to an intermediary, the intermediary selects a portfolio, the portfolio then selects investees, and then as a byproduct afterwards, we kind of figure out what impact that particular investment had. And the philanthropic world, which is $1 trillion a year, so it's far bigger than the impact investment world, is exactly the same model. You have a benefactor who says, these are my projects or the areas I care about. I'm going to find the right NGOs and charities. They're going to deploy that capital. And at the end of the year or at the end of 3 years, I'll get a fancy annual report. And I'm being a bit cynical, but it's just really to prove the point. So I think the methodology of this top-down driven capital flow is not really effective, A, in terms of the operational efficiency of it, but B, I don't think it's highlighting the impact opportunities that exist in the field. So with the breakthrough of technology, and I mean like really, really practical technologies, I'm talking about mobile device penetration. So I sit in Cape Town in Africa. If you would have told anybody 10 years ago that Africa would be covered in mobile connectivity, people would say, not a chance. Cosmore is on the call, who runs the Prekels Foundation. They said that 12 years ago, and they are serving 2 million mothers, all digital in South Africa, 40 million girls, you know, at teenage years. So penetration is no longer a problem. On top of that, we have sensors, devices, agricultural businesses, manufacturing businesses. They don't rely on the guy with the clipboard coming in once a year. They have actual technology devices that will allow them to capture data. So that's a big, big breakthrough, which allows us to change the methodology. So rather than coming top down, we can go bottom up. We can say, where is impact actually being delivered? Where is responsible manufacturing happening? Where is regenerative farming happening? Where is ocean plastic being actually cleaned up? Where are vaccinations being given? And then we have another technology called blockchain, which I don't want to dive into, but it ensures the data integrity from the input to the output. And the output can then be a proof of donation token if there's no economic return model around the activity. But if there is a return model, we can skip, again, various intermediary steps, go straight to the investor market with an investment token. So that's really at the methodology level where I see a huge amount of opportunity. The second is actual financial instruments. So I hinted at it already, but just to give you an example, I'm indulging a little bit, but I will keep quiet the rest of the call. We have a facility in a manufacturing company in India. I won't mention their name, but they employ 2,000 women. They skill 30,000 women. And they supply to one of Scandinavia's most sustainable furniture distributor. I think everybody knows who that is. So this Scandinavian sustainable furniture manufacturer has actually set as a prerequisite to them purchasing an order that the working conditions for the 2,000 women need to be adhered to a certain standard. So again, normally they send the guy with a clipboard in every 6 months, he ticks the boxes. But if I'm going to be funding the growth of this manufacturing facility, and I know that it's dependent on IKEA's continuing ordering, if I can have a dashboard, both for IKEA that shows minimum ages of the girls, maximum working hours, temperature controlled environments, childcare facility available, etc. If that's being shown as a technology platform to IKEA, and then therefore the investor knows IKEA is happy, we can go from $2 to $5 to $50 million in orders, then as an investor, my credit risk has reduced because I'm going from the guy with the clipboard every 6 months confirming that IKEA is going to place an order to on a live data stream, I know that IKEA will keep buying. So when my credit risk reduces, my cost of funding reduces. And this is one of the classic examples where impact itself, so adhering to sustainable working conditions for a larger facility would unlock economic value by reducing, say, a yield that's normally 15% to 10% or even below. So these kind of products, I think, are going to be actually doable from a technology perspective. And the final thing I'll say is, I don't know how many of you read the Melinda Gates book, Upliftment. And I mean, for me, it was quite interesting because I don't come from the development space. But the thing that caught my eye the most was this concept of unpaid work. And it's not just an emerging market thing. Like, I mean, Julia and I know each other quite well. We're going to have our kids run in the door. Our husbands, you know, work maybe even a little bit less than we do, but we're responsible for their school schedules, the food on the table, etc. So the level of unpaid work that happens all around the world sits predominantly with women. And I think they've calculated that it could be up to 30% of the GDP of countries if you actually had to pay for some of that unpaid work. Well, if you start paying for unpaid work, the catalytic effect is that if you have a boy and a girl, you're not going to say, oh, let's just send the boy to school because the girl is going to be at home and not earn anyway. Like the effect of maybe being able to monetize someone's contribution to a community or domestic environment, I mean, I'm thinking like Fitbit on steroids, right? Will be incredible. So those are just a few examples where I think technology will be a breakthrough in the impact space.
Fleur, absolutely. I think that technology and blockchain especially is like a tsunami and in moving forward in many ways. And the Melinda Gates book has been also a source of inspiration for our platform of the economy of care, because in the United States, women that have kids work at least 7 years for free compared to their partners. So on that note, I want to bring forward also Julia, who has been incredibly active in the impact financial space for more than 20 years and operate in intersection of families, financial institutions, and governments. So, Julia, do you agree with the Fleur assessment on the situation, and how do you think things will move forward? And I'm trying to unmute you. Wait, let me unmute you. Oh, sorry, you unmuted yourself.
Julia, you need to unmute.
Yes.
Oh, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Super happy to be here. Great to see some friends, and appreciate that you came to this webinar to listen to us. And we hope to have a very interactive discussion later on. I come from a slightly different perspective than Fleur, who is a very active entrepreneur, an impact entrepreneur. I come from the investment side. So I do invest my own money, but I predominantly advise and engage with different type of investors, ultra high net worth families, foundations, family offices, governments, large corporates, in helping them develop and implement impact investment strategies. And I think that while I do agree with Fleur that there is much more talk now in the impact investment space than action, and maybe we should quickly take a pause and just define what impact investing is, because I'm not sure that everybody here is familiar with the term. Impact investing is basically an investment approach which targets at two types of return: a financial return, like a traditional investment, and also some very tangible societal outcomes that could be social and environmental. So it's really a different approach from philanthropy, which provides grants, and it's also very different from a responsible investing, which is focusing on doing less harm. Impact investing is using capital to do good in really source and fund solutions to social or environmental problems. So has it delivered on its promise? So that's the great thing. I think there is a lot of hype, a lot of interest, but coming from 20 years ago, when the term impact investment has not been even found, I see it as actually as a very positive movement, because the term is known much more than before. And as a result, we have a depth of products and opportunities for investors, both ultra high net worth, but also the ones like you and me, who would invest with impact. And I think the breadth and the development of the impact investment space, and the ability for an investor to deploy capital and align their whole portfolios with their values, with the type of impact they want to have, I think is really fascinating. So for example, if you want to, if you're concerned about climate change, which is very difficult not to be at the moment, and you want to really make sure that your portfolio reflects that, in the past, you would only engage maybe in the clean tech companies, but currently you can really look at different types of investments in your portfolio. You can move some of your cash in a green bond, which will provide only green mortgages, or provide on lend to the entrepreneurs who are sustainable. You can look at your bond or fixed income portfolio and look at the green bond, for example, a UK company that used the proceeds from this bond to electrify London black cabs. In your equities, you can do a carbon footprint analysis. You can kick out some oil stocks, but also you can choose companies that proactively contribute climate solutions. And there are now, even the funds like the impacts, which only focus on pioneers, companies that actually provide innovative solutions, either in climate change mitigation or adaptation. You can also be an active investor. You can vote proxies. You can move large public companies towards more environmental sustainability. Then, of course, a lot of opportunities in the private equity, in the venture capital space. You can invest in rural solar electrification and wind parks, in alternative proteins. You can also look at your real assets and look at the forestry, wind parks, and organic or vertical farming. So it is currently possible for an investor to really align their whole portfolio and make the whole portfolio generate impact. Of course, not all of it will be catalytic and really moving a needle, but I think it's really a great step forward. But at the same time, I agree with Fleur, and I'm really concerned whether these investments that are capable of generating impact, absolutely, are they actually making a dent? Are we actually solving the problems? And I think that is actually a bit of a scary realization after 15 or 20 years of preaching the beauty of impact investing, that many of those solutions are while generating impact, do not change the actual systems and do not change the root causes of the problems. But my hope is that it's the growing pains. I mean, if you think about philanthropy, we've been doing it for ages, for centuries. But only now philanthropy moves from actually writing checks to looking at what is the effect of our giving. So I think it's a natural evolution of impact investing, of going through maybe mildly impactful things to really start looking for more systemic solutions.
Thank you, Julia. That was really very inspiring, especially the concept of the definition of impact and your vision of how things are moving, and that there's a lot of growing still in this industry. But can you mention something in your opinion on the role of technology and the role of women in technology and impact?
Well, the role of technology, I think, we know each other with Fleur a lot, and we tend to disagree on a number of things, and that's why we love collaborating with each other, because we bring different perspectives. I do love technology, and I think that technology has a tremendous potential, but I tend to see it really as a tool rather than a key driver. Of course, what Laura mentioned, or what Fleur mentioned about the fact that technology like blockchain can provide really, transparency in the supply chain, can really, help you fund the outcomes. It's fantastic. And also we see that technology now can really solve very, very difficult problems that we as impact investors have been facing for a long time, such as last mile, the ability to reach really rural off-grid populations, rural, remote populations in a more effective manner. And also it can democratize impact investing, right? Through, through tokens for blockchain, you can provide really retail investors access to impact investment opportunities. And I love it. But I see that what is needed is really something bigger. What we need is a mind shift and a shift in a mindset. And I think the whole, and I think Fleur is actually mentioned a little bit. Our system and in impact investing is focused on individual transaction. We have a product, if we want to, if we're interested in gender and women, we will invest in microfinance, or we will invest in women entrepreneurs, right? That's kind of it. But I think what we do is we really need to look at root causes of the problem. We really, really need to go back and see what causes this rotten system we're living in that doesn't work. And systemic change is rarely can be achieved purely by investment capital, right? So you have to look at different pieces of a puzzle. It includes very often, education. It needs grants to maybe build infrastructure, to pilot new approaches. It requires change in policies. You need to shift cultural patterns. And very often change in systems and real impact requires patience of 15, 20 years, which we actually as investors don't really have. So, and I think that it's really very difficult to practice that, and few investors are capable of that. But if anybody is capable, I think it's private investors. And I do work with families, but I also work with institutional investors and sovereign, so I can see different aspects. But I'm really most excited about private investors, who I think are the ones who can really act on their conviction, act on their values, act on their intention, and reflect it properly, create the alliances, and really go for systemic change, or for real change, for real impact. But it means that we need to really help investors, and particularly private investors, to really evolve in their strategies from individual transactions to more systemic impact. And I believe if we do that, and we build their capacity to really want it and ability to get it, it will trickle down in the system. Because if the asset owner really looks for systemic change, it would create demand both for innovative products, for innovative or systemic advice, for infrastructure partners, And I think then collectively we can start moving the needle.
Wow, very, very interesting. And you're right, I totally agree with you that systemic change can only happen with what we know as the SDG 17, partnerships, because the power of partnerships as described by Paul Polman is 1 + 1 = 11. And so unless we all partner, but mostly the private investors will get somewhere. But I have another question for Fleur. You are a female impact entrepreneur in your own right. What does the future hold for impact investors? What role will female entrepreneurs and investors play in the future? If you can tell us more about that, please.
Sure. So, I mean, I don't see myself as an impact entrepreneur. So even though I was a bit cynical about the impact space, I'm hugely bullish. I actually don't think in the next 20 years we will have a single company that doesn't have impact. It might have negative impact, but I think it will be the burden on each company to prove, you know, whether they are contributing positively or negatively to society. So I think every entrepreneur is going to be an impact entrepreneur. Every impact entrepreneur is an entrepreneur. The second thing that I think that, you know, we talked about technology as a driver, but what Julia referred to is really the demand side, right? So the intent of investors to have impact is bigger, higher than it's ever been. And it's just generally in people's nature to want to do good. But again, you know, if you can't channel that into something that you can trust or that meets your appropriate risk return requirements, then you're just going to keep on doing the same old, same old. So I think there's a massive opportunity for any entrepreneur really. And I would love to encourage female entrepreneurs to come into the space because I think it requires a non-linear thinking approach. And I'm not saying that every entrepreneurial idea has to be a circular economy idea, but I'm just thinking that we've done this industrial revolution boxing system for over 100 years now, right? It's time to move on. There are new business models. They require more creativity. Sometimes it's not entirely black and white. Sometimes you have to use some subjective judgments. So again, like I'm not a gender person, so I'm not like, oh, women are better at this and male are better at this. But what we've seen so far is that the male-dominated investment world and entrepreneurial world thinks in a particular linear standardized way. So if we're looking at new models, it kind of makes logical sense that you might want to include, you know, the other gender or, different thinkers within the male gender to create some other opportunities. So I'm really a huge buyer of that. On top of that, and this is really more Julia's space, I think, you know, because in society, you know, our relationships, like our marriages are far more 50-50, or at least it is particularly the way in the Northern European cultures. I think the way that we transfer wealth to the next generation, we no longer have, you know, the primogenitor rule in most families. So all kids will be distributed with assets. Children can participate in the decision-making process. So I have to honestly say that I've actually come across very, very few female investors in my whole path over the last 15 years, which is surprising. And I think that's going to change rapidly as well. And again, we don't always have to just refer to the multi-million-dollar investors. I really also believe in the value and the volume of the crowds. So again, by creating products that democratize access to impact, I think, you know, a lot more people can participate. And if you have like hundreds of millions of people putting in $10 or $100 a year, that's a lot of money. That's more money than we have right now in the impact space. So this is where I think, you know, the contribution of women at the entrepreneurial level, but also at the investor level, is definitely a space to watch. And we know that the investment world is kind of gearing up for that anyway.
Well, that's amazing what you said, because it's true that these new business models are really rising up. And and I'm also not like a gender person, but what we believe, there's a new initiative by Heidi Dangelmeyer, where she really believes that this lineal left side brain type of maybe male way of thinking is going to be advanced by the female more right side brain. And if you have any doubt which side it is, you know, always the right side, women are always right, just for you to know and remember that. But we have new initiatives like Kiva, Shio, and Catalyze. All these new funds that are based for women, are for women and by women, are starting to exist. and they are slowly catching up. And on this, I would like to ask Giulia a simple question. You have been researching the impact strategies for more than 200 leaders in private investment, and you advise female investors, and you run a KATALYST programs in focusing on that. So what is your take on the future of impact investment and the role of female investors in this? And tell us more about your book as well, please. Oops.
Yes, I mean, I think the 200 families I worked on, had 7 years of research on the Guide to Impact Investing is a second book, which focuses on strategies and lessons learned from leading private impact investors, families of wealth, and many actually women who are profiled there and who are doing really amazing things. I think just firstly to mention, I do not think that impact investing would be mainstreamed. And there's a lot of talk now about, and Fleur mentioned a little bit, that it would be all impact. I remember 16, 17 years ago when I was pitching a fund at AIG about the impact investing, and I was researching the space. Impact investing didn't exist, but sustainable investing did, and social entrepreneurship, was there. And I remember at a presentation, I was telling people that, look, and it was 2004, 2003, 2004, I was telling, look, in 10 years, sustainable investing will not exist. It would all be sustainable investing. And sustainable investing is much more straightforward, right? Because it targets maximization of really profit and just takes societal and environmental issues as a proxy for good management of companies. And we're not even there. And I think, I became much more cautious about it. And I think impact investing doesn't need to be mainstreamed in order to be effective. I think the core criteria of impact investing is intentionality, is the desire and intent to generate impact. And I believe only asset owners have the luxury to act on this desire. If you manage a pension fund, whose values you're going to be representing. Can you afford to really, focus on mission at an expense of maybe, liquidity or, profitability, whatever. I don't believe that those would be the pioneers in the space. But I think families would be, and a lot of families actually, and a lot of private investors are actually focusing now on changing the system. And I think what we need to arrive at is where you don't need an intent to generate impact, but a company that generates impact, an investment opportunity, a company like, for example, Fleur's proof of impact, if they generate impact, they would be much better positioned to compete in the market because they really respond to a demand, a growing demand for those solutions. And I think a lot of impact investors trying actually to exit to traditional investors, and they see mainstreaming by that they would really bring those solutions, which are initially funded by impact investors, into a level of scale and proof of performance, both financial and impact, that can be picked up and carried by more traditional investors. And that's, for me, would be a much higher path towards growth. And then as for female investors, I used to work in investment industry, and I used to be surrounded by guys. And I think the more I work in impact investing, the more I become a fan of women. And I have much more kick at having women as clients. And I think, and I hugely believe that the next phase of really smart impact investing would come from women. Why? I think on one side, Fleur mentioned that the shift of capital is going in this direction. We have a tremendous transfer of capital in trillions and trillions of dollars going to women, to next generation and to women. That's one side. But for me, I think that's less important. I think generally, women, through its nature, are really very attracted by opportunities, investment opportunities that can provide you not just financial return, but have this nurturing element and this value beyond the financial. I think there are much less egos and competition, and there's a much more inclusive approach. And what we've discussed with Fleur, and we agree both, we need, in order to move it, in order to really create systemic change, we need partnership. And Laura, you mentioned it as well. And partnership means, really, coming down on your own egos, on your own achievements, and really being part of the system. And I think that comes more naturally to women. And I think, what I've seen actually with women investors is that once they get their strategy going and they understand and get their capacity up, they have actually much more guts and can go and take much more risks if it is for impact than some of my male clients, for example, maybe because there's not this competitive thing that I need to, gain the highest return. But I see also a lot of problem. There's a huge potential, right? But a lot of those women, wealth holders, are not really investors. And they've been raised with the perception that it's a male-dominated industry. It is very complex. It is scary and boring, and it's not for me. And I see that that's holding a lot of great smart capital from playing in impact investing, because women are intimidated by investing in finance. And I think we're talking a lot in the industry about empowering women in the bottom of the pyramid, but I think it's time to empower women at the top of the pyramid so that they can actually understand that they can be actually very, very good impact investors. And they don't need to be, huge specialists, but they can develop strategies which could be systemic, and they can surround themselves with people who can help them implement those strategies. But they have the opportunity to really express their values and their desire for impact through their investing. So, and I think that's the idea behind the Catalyst, which is a capacity building platform for female investors. Originally, it was for both genders, and I'm also very, very cautious about excluding. But I was talking to a friend of ours, Fleur, Lori, just the other week, and I was telling her, look, I'm really focusing it on women. A lot of people actually criticizing that, and she was saying that, look, it's just a segmentation. Women, and I think that's what you were saying, Fleur, as well. We've been neglecting women on the investment side for so many years. So it's just equalizing. It's not preferring women, but enabling them to get to the level where they can play and really take a possession, truly take a possession of their wealth.
It's funny, this reminds me of a quote. I don't know, you guys probably heard Hillary Clinton when she was running for president. She goes, get really frustrated about, women being considered a minority group. Like, we're bloody half of the world's population.
Exactly. And so we have the sky, as a few people have written, and this is the role, I think, of women now, to take actually total responsibility and put up their sleeves up and do something in a big way. And so every woman has that responsibility of taking action and taking full responsibility of impact action. So the next question is about the Sdg Action Manager. That is a tool that was just launched a few weeks ago by the B Lab and the UN Global Compact. It is a tool that it helps companies internally assess where they are in their impact of the SDGs. So Fleur and Julie, you can mention what it's already 2015, we have the SDGs. What do you think about them? What do you think about this tool, and how do you think this tool and this movement of using business as a force for good really will have an impact in women and impact investment?
Do you want me to go first, Fleur? I do not know the tool very well, so I cannot really mention on that. But I think on SDGs, frankly, I think it's a great achievement in a way that we finally have the common language which can unite different types of people who are looking for positive impact. But unfortunately, I don't see at the moment as SDGs being used to develop strategies. I see, at least on the investment side, people doing the tagging, retroactive tagging. This is my strategy. You know, which SDGs does it address? Rather than saying, let's look at the SDGs and try to see, try to use them to guide in our strategy. And I think, you know, partially it's been difficult sometimes to use, you know, for some of people I work with and clients, it's been difficult to, for example, link the impact assessment and measurement to SDGs, because there hasn't been really kind of the targets are on the country level, so it's it has not been yet very practical for impact investors. But I think aligning yourself with SDG is becoming very much mainstream. But it's a danger as well, because you know, I bet Shell can contribute to a number of SDGs, or any company can. So yeah, it's difficult to then judge whether the company is actually generating a significant impact or not. Just by.
Right. And I think, I mean, you mentioned sustainable investing, responsible investing, signing up to the PRI. I mean, you ask any investment manager, what are the 6 principles of the PRI, which are the principles of responsible investing? They don't have a clue. But actually, the most important principle is that you actually track and monitor your company's progress towards having a sustainable activity level, which is what this tool is trying to do. So I think because, I mean, I was at Davos this year, and it was all about the SDGs. I mean, every company, every government, every NGO. And I think that's the power of it. We have a 17 color coded box. Couldn't get any simpler, right? And everybody can hang their hat on something. I think that's also kind of the limit of where its value lies, right? So I think as soon as you go down to anything like, as Julia said, a strategy for a business plan or an investment strategy, that's not what it was intended to be. They were just purely supposed to be growth and development goals to bring, you know, the 5 billion people who do not have access to basic human life, to bring them out of that level and to make sure that we leave the planet better behind than we have found it now. So, but what is good, and this is what comes back to intent, is that it is a company's and a company's leader responsibility from now on, and they're feeling the pressure from their consumers, from their shareholders, from regulators, to start tracking and monitoring what they're doing. And that's why I think every company will be an impact business. It won't necessarily all have positive impact, but they will have to show what they do. I mean, we can sit here and poo on the Shells and the BPs, etc., but we all still fly, right? We mostly drive petrol-driven cars, and they are in a transition phase. So we have to acknowledge that some of these companies are better than others in the transition phase, and they should be able to document that, and they should be able to maybe even be rewarded for that. And I saw Vivina is on the call. I mean, Vivina even mentioned the idea of, like, you know, SDG bonds. I mean, it's ridiculous that we only have green bonds that are hardly green anyway. Like, every SDG is a target that companies could basically prove, and they should be able to raise cheaper funding if they contribute to something in that space than not. So I think, you know, there's things to be played with here, but it's not the be all and end all. Let's call it that way.
Yeah. So thank you very much. Is Vivina there? Do you want to make any comment? Also, I would like to open up the question to everybody in the line, but also if you can mention a little bit more, what are green bonds or SDG bonds, because this has been going on and is the best way governments are really contributing to create a systemic change so far. I don't know if there's anything better at this point for systemic change than these bonds, other than the personal investment that it's just it's personal, and maybe the Gates Foundation, you know what they're doing. But can you tell us more about the green bonds, please?
Sure, and thanks. First of all, hi Laura, hi Fleur, hi Julia, lovely to see you, all 3 of you. Gosh, as you know, it's a rich subject, it's a complex subject, and it's a difficult one to grapple. And the question that I actually have, I will answer your question, Laura, but the question that I have for Julia and Fleur, which I would love to hear more about, is we all collectively use the phrase systemic change. I have not yet really been able myself to understand what that means, what I mean when I use that sentence, which system do I want to change, how should it change? And frankly, sometimes I wonder, do I really want the system to change, or the way that we behave in the system? So that, I'll give you a few minutes to think about that. And in answer to Laura's question, well, green bonds is not really governments. Green bonds have been primarily corporates who have been issuing bonds to fund projects that are actually helping the transition to a cleaner environmental practices. And yes, there's been a lot of talk and a lot of issuance over the last few years. There've been, it started with a few billions, and last year was $200 billion of green bond issuance. What is interesting is what it is a company that has understood that they can actually raise cheaper capital by ring fencing it for something that is supposed to be good for the environment. And indeed, it has worked. The problem with bonds in general, not just the green ones, but also the sustainability ones and now the social impact bonds, is that like most fixed income markets, they generate very low returns. Now, if on top of that they're issued at a premium, they generate even less returns for investors. At the same time, you look at the markets and you see that investors are investing in bonds in the trillions, while they're actually investing in equity and private equity in significantly lower amounts. Again, one of the conundrums and complexities of financial industry, there's lots of different motivations. ESG is only one of them. Risk-adjusted returns is, of course, the one that has been around for longest. How to square the circle is what brings us here today. And I'd like to make another last comment on something that both you, Fleur, and Laura mentioned, which is gender and how to tackle women. And, Julia was talking about how wonderful it is to actually start targeting and recognizing that women are a piece of the market that we have not been focusing on explicitly. But I was recently at Super Return International in Berlin, and there was a panel on diversity. And what I think we generally underestimate, although Fleur mentioned it, is that diversity, first of all, is not just gender, but primarily it is thinking differently from the dominating decision makers. And okay, I think there is little debate about me being a woman, but if I think like most men that I've been surrounded with and by, I'm not going to add that much value in terms of diversity. And that is something that I think we have to be a little bit more conscious about when we bring different values, different points of view, different attitudes around the table. And we also have to be conscious that the more diversity you bring around the table, the more difficult it is to manage and to lead a diverse conversation. And so it's a little bit similar to the conversation of, does impact investing have a consequences on the return? And that debate is going on all the time as well. Does diversity add to the cost of managing a company, a business, a decision-making process? And so here is some thoughts that the two of you have sparked in your conversation, and I wish to sort of bring them, back to you to hear your thoughts on my thoughts.
I'm happy to have a stab first. I love the philosophical tone of where you started. And as some of you who know me, I've just finished a 3-year online course at the Vedanta Academy, which is a philosophy school outside of Pune. And I actually just listed it Vedanta World, because this question of do we change the world or do they change the subject, right, is the fundamental question in life, right? Your world is only what you see it to be as a subject. So do you change the supply or do you change the demand side? Like I remember my husband, when we got our first investment from the Oxford Endowment into Osmosis Investment Management, you know, they had a huge uproar at the university. This was already 6-7 years, maybe 10 years ago, because it was this huge divestment campaign and they had investments into some of the extractive industry companies. And their question was to Garrett, can you help articulate, you know, what your thoughts on that are, since you are our resource efficiency asset management investment? And he very eloquently described that the concept of divestment doesn't necessarily work. You can't tell people to not invest in Shell, not invest in BP, not use these things. I mean, what you have to tell them is that there is an alternative that they can use. And once the demand side starts changing, then the supply side will meet that. And that's how typically things change. Revolution starts from the bottom and culture typically comes down from the top. So I think in terms of systemic change, I'll give you one more example where I have actually seen systemic change really making a difference. And maybe I have a different view of systemic change because I'm not really an academic on the topic. But if I look at Africa again, and I look at whatever decision was made to no longer invest in fixed line telephony, but go straight to mobile, and the consequences that that has had on healthcare, education, mobile money, etc., and the infrastructure that is now leap years ahead of what I've seen in most US, you know, states and definitely in some in the European countries, that was like a change that probably wasn't even driving to have a systemic impact on a very, very large population, but it was something that definitely has made the biggest difference on the continent over the last 10 years.
Vivina, thanks for your questions. Really very good questions. I love the question about systemic change because I'm also struggling with that. And the two concepts which I tend to associate it with and which help me actually, you know, kind of understand it is, I think, you know, on one side, I think for me, systemic change from the investment standpoint is related to two concepts. One, looking at root causes of problems, right? Trying to create your theory of change. And by creating your theory of change, not just have your investment and then going backwards, but actually say, what are we trying to achieve? And then going, and people say, you have to go 5 times. Why is it not being done? Because this is not happening. And why this is not being done? Because this is not happening. And why this is not being done? And when you go to the 5th time, that would be the root causes. And then if you try to really target the root causes rather than the second level or the first level, which you consider, you will have a theory of change which will have legs. So I think that's, for me, is one part. And another part of systemic change is while you go those 5 levels down, don't also look at only at positive, but look at the unintended consequences on the way. And if we as an investors, in a very pragmatic way, try to attack root causes and look that we're not screwing up other things on the way while trying to generate positive impact, I think we would be much more systemic in our thinking and in our investing.
Excellent. I think this is really a great conversation about the root causes to create change. So I would like to ask everybody in the line, if you want to comment on a specific examples you lived, special speakers, where systemic change has been taken and happened just because of impact investment by women, and where have you seen it or not?
Can I add a part, Laura, to your question, which is at scale? Because I understand, Julia, your definition. Thank you. And I would agree with it. But how are we? I mean, to me, there is another dimension. Apart from the depth of the questions and finding the root causes, is how can we get the system at large, so everybody, to do and change their ways so that we can have make a systemic change. And so how many people are going, you know, when you give your examples, have actually done the root analysis, but then acted on it at scale, because that is my cynicism.
Consequence. I mean, like, again, I think if you look at the commercial world, what are the examples of that kind of an intervention? Uber, Airbnb, AWS, right? That have had broad scale adoption because of a radically different approach to a particular opportunity. I don't think we've had anything in the impact space. And I think even when you go down the root cause analysis, I think that the established connections between cause and effect, I don't know if we have enough data on to even establish the real root cause.
But I think we need to talk about real big change, globally. And I think, we can talk about small systemic change, right? In the scale of a particular issue in a particular area. Let's say you want to affect, girl, access to education to girls in, I don't know, Uganda. So I'm thinking that even there, the investors don't necessarily go this, to this systemic and theory of change, right? So I'm not talking about changing the education system on the global scale. For me, that is, I don't think that has happened yet. And I think, I've been involved in a number of multi-stakeholder partnership approaches. I think it's very, very difficult because there's a lot of egos, a lot of agendas, and even the good intentions of all the parties at the beginning stumble against the internal objectives and of the parties. And you cannot do it single-handedly. But
against that, if you look like a country, Rwanda, which I think has gone through the biggest systemic change. I mean, 25 years ago, 1.1 million people killed in 100 days. South Africa, 25 years ago, apartheid. 25 years in South Africa, not much has changed. 25 years in Rwanda, you have a country where law and order persist. It's the most favorable business environment in the world. Most people get educated. Like the equality there that has been achieved and the peacefulness, but it was driven by one individual.
But it's an enlightened dictatorship, right?
I know. So maybe that's the solution.
Not only an individual, also 60% of the women sit in the parliament. Just
yeah,
so
but you have to be careful with that. That's because they killed most of the men, remember? So I once brought that up, and my husband said, "Sure, can you just do your research properly? Because that is not necessarily by choice."
No, I understand. I know that perfectly well. But the women in the government are also making decisions.
True. And it's a vegetarian culture. 89% of the people are vegetarian because they forbid you to feed your animals what a human being could eat. It's very smart.
And then the plastic initiatives they have, I mean, everything they do, all the solar initiatives they have. No, I've been an investor in Rwanda.
Kind of benign dictatorship. Like if you look at intellectual ventures, we're quite, which is Bill Gates's playground, basically. I mean, my business partner, Julian, is very much involved there. It's a very similar, if you have that amount of money and resources and you can really dictate the progress of various components at the same time, you can eradicate something like a polio, right? But the mass amount of resources you need, or power, which is another form of resource, to affect it, I don't know, I agree with Julia, I don't know if that can be done with partnerships.
I mean, I think that's the only way, where, you cannot do it just by investing, you cannot do it by granting, you have to combine different forces and different levers.
That you will control, yeah. And everything needs to go in the same direction. There needs to be
policy element that there needs, so I think that that is impossible to do without partnership, but partnership is a difficult thing to do.
Yeah, so, and yes, I think that going back to Rwanda, I think that it makes a difference when you have a good percentage of the people in power that are women, because they bring what we call the economies of care, foremost of care, dignity, collaboration. And whether half of the men were killed or not, we are, as we said at the very beginning, we are half the population in the world. So there should be a lot more representation in most countries if this is the situation.
We have to again be careful with cause and effect and correlation. South Africa has huge representation of female members in parliament, maybe even as big as Rwanda. It's the most violent country in the world. So I don't think that's necessarily the same thing as like a woman on the board, right, outperforms. It's not necessarily that the woman on the board makes the outperformance happen. So I think we need to be very careful with these kinds of statements.
Yes, but I think, Fleur, I think that has been proven that the woman on the board is not because she's a woman, but because she's bringing different point of view, and that's to Vivina's point, right? You know,
I'm just saying there's a correlation between
the
female
diversity
members on boards performing. I'm saying that it doesn't necessarily mean that if you put a female member on your board, you're going to perform. I'm saying it's correlation, not necessarily causality.
Exactly. So on this note, we are on the line and the time, and I would be great if both of you can give us maybe a wrap up of what you said, and what are your call to action to this group, and what do you think are your objectives and intentions regarding impact investment with women?
So I thank you very much again. It was really nice to get other people's insights, and I think I really want to echo what Julia said, because I think that's the most important thing. Like, I think the confidence levels in women is naturally lower than it should be. So again, whether you're an investor or an entrepreneur, there is no like golden path to success in any of these opportunities, and we're super lucky that it's a relatively young industry. So experimentation, risk taking is not only allowed, it should be encouraged, right? And I just want to encourage everybody that is on here that has an idea or wants to do something. Don't be stopped by anything. Just go ahead. If it's your gut instinct, it's your gut instinct. If it's analysis, go with the analysis. But action is the word of the day. You have to keep acting. And as long as we do that with the right intent, we should deliver results.
Yeah, no, I think that's very good. I would just add to that maybe the perspective of investing again. I think we all are investors through our pension funds, through our private portfolios. And I think that there are opportunities now to align it with things that we are passionate about or things we feel strongly about. And there are a lot of retail affluent investor options in impact investing. And I think that's also a great way of starting on this path. I think that that's something which is really, brings a different perspective. As many impact investors said, it's really the realization that finance is a powerful tool. What it powers actually flourishes. So I think that's important that we align our financial means with what we think and believe. And there are exciting opportunities currently to do that. And also, as female entrepreneurs, there are a lot of investors who are seeking for values-led, values-aligned, impact-driven, mission-driven businesses. And I don't say that only females are doing it, but there particularly now entrepreneurs are looking for it, or not entrepreneurs, but investors. So I just encourage you, and I heard from Laura that all of you are women with careers, women with entrepreneurial women who want to do good. And I think this is the time now for female entrepreneurs, for impact investors, and for impact entrepreneurs. So I think it's a great time.
Well, thank you. This has been incredible. So Fleur and Julia, this has been a really great and inspiring webinar. And I will ask you, Be Women is all about action. So I will ask you to take the next 30 seconds to write down what is that this 50 minutes have inspired you to do. What action are you going to take? And if you can share them maybe on the chat, or after we stop the recording, share them with everybody, because action happens the moment you hear something, you actually do it, and then you take action specifically. Send an SMS, call this person in 5 minutes. You need to take action immediately when you get inspired. On that note, I will just tell you that we have amazing webinars coming up, many. Every week we have one, and they are one more inspiring than the other. The next one we have is something that is very important, that is the Benefit Corporation, the impact on our economy and society, on March 17th. St. Patrick's Day by Bill Clark. And he has been the promoter of all this movement, legislative movement of benefit corporation that has also impacted and will impact society. Because if you can have not only for-profit companies on one side and then non-for-profit on one side, and then in the middle have benefit corporation where companies can be purposeful and profitable, pay taxes as normal benefits, normal companies, but this can really change society. In the US, we have more than 36 states. We have Italy, we have Ecuador, we have this law in Latin America, the BIC law, and it's really impactful. So we have also another webinar about sustainable tourism. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry, and it's impacting greatly our environment. So Daniela Koch from Fleur Consulting, she will give an amazing and inspiring talk on March the 26th. We have also Alba Guzman, who will talk about the impact that brands have if they are truly and authentically impact, and how this is changing in the world. We also have another one on non-conflict, that everyday peacemaking, that is a methodology well known by some, called Season Smiles, because we've had the same webinar in Spanish, and this is all about a 3-step, very simple process of transforming conflict into non-conflict, transforming conflict into an opportunity for growth. And with that, I would like to close and thank you again, everybody, for really being part of this webinar and this movement of women, of the Women's Solutions. Thank you very much.